The man who mastered lightning. Inspired by the legend of Tesla.
Picture a man standing absolutely fearless in a pitch-black laboratory. Millions of volts of artificial lightning are literally exploding all around him, violently dancing through the air and lighting up the room in these blinding flashes of purple and white. Now, to the outside world, this guy looks completely insane. But inside that room, right in the middle of the deafening crackle of electricity, he's perfectly calm. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're tracing the epic, almost mythic journey of Nikola Tesla, a man who pretty much invented the 20th century only to be totally left behind by it.
Okay, let's dive into this. The wizard, the mad scientist, and perhaps the most chilling one, the man who dealt with the devil. People back in his era genuinely called them these names, but why? Well, it wasn't because he was evil or practicing dark magic or anything like that. It was just because his ideas were impossibly far ahead of his time. He was busy dreaming up the invisible systems that literally power our world today, while everyone else around him was still trying to read by the dim flicker of gaslight and traveling by horse and buggy. To them, his science was completely indistinguishable from sorcery.
And the legend of Tesla literally begins with this incredible cinematic clash of darkness and light. He was born in 1856 in what is now Croatia, right in the middle of a massively violent lightning storm. As thunder shook the walls of the house, the story goes that the midwife, totally terrified by the severe weather and taking it as a bad omen, declared, "This child will be a child of darkness." But Tesla's mother immediately pushed back. She said no, he will be a child of light. That thematic bookend, darkness versus light, the unknown versus illumination, would profoundly define his entire epic existence.
It was super clear very early on that his mind just did not work like anyone else's. His cognitive abilities were, frankly, almost superhuman. He had this profound photographic memory and an extreme, almost overwhelming imagination. He didn't just have good ideas. He could actually mentally build complex machines, turn them on inside his head, let them run for weeks, and then inspect the imaginary gears to find exactly where the wear and tear would happen. All of this without ever drawing a single physical blueprint. While other kids were outside playing normal games, young Nikola was already obsessing over invisible forces, dreaming of somehow controlling the very lightning that marked the night he was born.
So, the crucial point is that this early obsession led him straight to alternating current, or AC power. You see that sine wave equation? That wave represents an electrical system capable of traveling massive distances. The competing system at the time, direct current, or DC, just couldn't travel very far without losing all its punch. AC, however, could be easily stepped up to massive voltages for long-distance travel and then stepped right back down for safe use in people's homes. It was absolutely brilliant. But the world initially pushed back hard. People thought AC was wildly dangerous, completely untamable. But, as we see so often in the epic journeys of misunderstood geniuses, true visionaries see the architecture of the future long before anyone else does.
He eventually went to work for the famous Thomas Edison in 1884, arriving in America with exactly zero money, a few basic belongings, and enormous dreams. But these two men were destined to clash in what became known as the current war. Tesla was the pure visionary, a perfectionist utterly obsessed with the discovery and implementation of his AC system, driven by this deep desire to elevate humanity. Edison, on the other hand, was the highly practical businessman. He was aggressive, super focused on profit, deeply invested in his own DC patents, and he was absolutely willing to play dirty to protect them. It was a complete clash of worldviews. You had the dreamer going head-to-head with the industrialist.
Now, to win over a very skeptical public, Tesla engineered sheer visual spectacle. We might jokingly call it a devil's arsenal of the 1890s. Just imagine walking into a Victorian-era exhibition room. You're expecting a dry, simple science lecture. Instead, you see giant electrical arcs shooting wildly across the ceiling. You see glass tubes glowing brilliantly with absolutely no wires attached to them. You see remote-controlled boats navigating pools of water as if guided by ghosts, and massive, humming Tesla coils throwing huge sparks into the air. To terrified crowds, this didn't look like engineering or physics. It looked like supernatural magic, summoned by a man who had somehow unlocked the deepest secrets of the universe.
But Tesla knew exactly what he was doing. to prove to a fearful public that his alternating current was completely safe, and, of course, to counter Edison's nasty smear campaigns, he would literally allow hundreds of thousands of volts of electricity to pass completely through his own body during these public demonstrations. Can you imagine? Crowds watched in absolute shock. He just stood there, completely untouched, a halo of electricity glowing around his frame, holding light bulbs that lit up right there in his bare hands. He looked mythical, like a misunderstood wizard bending the raw, terrifying power of nature to his absolute will.
And that absolute, unwavering conviction totally paid off, leading to a massive historic milestone. The very first time in human history that massive cities received efficient, long-distance electrical power. Partnering with the brilliant industrialist George Westinghouse, Tesla's AC system achieved the ultimate victory over Edison's DC system by successfully harnessing the unimaginable raw power of Niagara Falls. This massive hydroelectric project proved Tesla right on a truly monumental scale. He didn't just win a technical argument here, he officially flipped the switch on the modern electrical age. He had quite literally brought light to the world.
But we have to pause here for a second and ask a deeply difficult question. What happens when a visionary's dreams are just too big for the world to understand? Think about it. Tesla had just electrified the globe. He was at the absolute peak of his fame and power. But his mind was already decades, maybe even a century down the road. And that relentless drive forward, that total inability to just stop, sit back, and profit from what he had already built, well, that would become his tragic undoing.
And what all this brilliantly illustrates is just how far ahead he really was. While the rest of the world was just barely getting used to the concept of a light bulb, Tesla was already envisioning free wireless energy. He was dreaming of pocket-sized devices that eerily mirror our modern smartphones, global communication networks, and the instant wireless transmission of pictures and information. He was predicting the connected planet that you and I live on right now well over 100 years ago. He saw a future where humanity was united by an invisible web of frequencies.
To make that connected world a reality, he began building his most ambitious project ever, Wardenclyffe Tower. It was a giant, incredibly expensive, 186-foot-tall structure out on Long Island, and it was meant to transmit energy and communication globally, completely without wires. At first, he secured funding from financial giants like J.P. Morgan. But this time, the magic just didn't work out. When Morgan realized Tesla wanted to transmit free energy, meaning it couldn't be easily metered and sold for a profit, investors grew incredibly uncertain. The massive funding he needed simply disappeared. The tower just sat there, unfinished, a towering, haunting monument to a future that wouldn't arrive for decades. And this massive, very public failure broke Tesla, both emotionally and financially.
If we trace the rapid, almost unbelievable arc of this man's life, the contrast is just staggering. He arrived in America completely penniless in 1884. Fast forward to the 1890s, he was terrifying and dazzling the public with these supernatural demonstrations, rising to the very pinnacle of the scientific world. But by 1943, he died in complete isolation. Yet, the story doesn't end there, does it? Because today, in our modern era, he has achieved a form of true, lasting immortality.
Now, those later years were undeniably tragic. The fall of a genius is often incredibly steep. Investors completely abandoned him for more immediately profitable, practical ventures. He lived out his days isolated in various New York hotel rooms, moving from one to the next as the bills kept piling up, eventually finding his only real company in feeding pigeons all by himself. And as he aged, he became surrounded by these wild, exaggerated myths, stories of secret death rays and government conspiracies swooping in to steal his papers. And while we definitely need to recognize that many of those stories were heavily exaggerated or just misunderstood, the harsh reality of his profound isolation and his brilliant, restless mind was very, very real. He was quite literally a man out of time.
Let's look at how all this builds into his ultimate legacy, because the story of a true genius rarely ends in the dark. History eventually caught up. Today, his immortality is absolutely undeniable. I mean, his name is literally used as a standard scientific unit for magnetic flux density. His inventions and theories are studied globally by literally every electrical engineering student. He's celebrated in countless documentaries, and his uncompromising vision is honored by modern innovators, perhaps most famously by the namesaken company Tesla Inc. History finally recognized him, not as some madman, but as one of the single greatest inventors to ever walk the earth.
Which brings us to our final takeaway today. Genius is rarely rewarded immediately. The man the public once feared, and actually called a devil, was, in reality, the exact man who brought light to the world, just like his mother predicted on that stormy night he was born. And it leaves us with a pretty profound question to ponder. Does true innovation always require such immense personal sacrifice? Really think about that the next time you flip a switch, connect to your Wi-Fi, or just turn on a light. You are living in the future that Nikola Tesla built. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.